Alrighty, welcome to Molding a Monarch. We're basically going to cover how the different heirs have been raised, the infrastructure behind them, what kind of contributes to the personality, what makes an heir, and why that's important as to we're going to fight death to live. So I know it's a big topic to cover. We're not going to get everybody, but hopefully we can get a few examples of it.
Got a couple people flowing in still. Do we want to introduce ourselves and then kind of start talking about some of our thoughts?
Sure.
Yeah.
My name's Aziz. I'm from the podcast History of Westeros, and I've been to Ice and Farrakhan many times, and I'm very happy to be back talking Song of Ice and Fire fun stuff with you all.
Yeah, and I'm Pat, and I don't have a podcast or anything. I'm just addicted to Game of Thrones. That's it.
One day you'll be one of us, Pat. If you have any
That's
moments,
right, yeah.
anyone could do it. So
That's right.
unfortunately,
You're halfway there.
my name is Chloe. I am the small counsel for Ice and Fire Con, and you might know me from the podcast Girls Gone Canon, where we cover Song of Ice and Fire, POV character by POV character. And I'm excited to, chat about some of the ways some of these heirs have been raised or not raised. Defend Joffrey a little bit. I'm just gonna put that out there. I think I might. I think I just might. I don't know. Hey, was Robert Baratheon your father? I rest my case. Wrong panel, sorry.
We don't have gavels on this one.
Not yet.
Not yet. Maybe we should be introduced to all panels.
We all go on record. Your dad should never punch your teeth out. For whatever the reason
Not
is.
even one tooth.
Yeah, it was like several.
Yeah.
I think it don't do that again. Maybe it's a little bit. But either way, sorry.
Good start. Good start. So we'll start off with an easy example of how not to raise any child. And then, but the problem, of course, is when you're a king, your childhood trauma is, as they say, you project what was put into you on the world, and when you're a king, that's an awful lot of people you're projecting on. Mm-hmm. So just a very simple example of how garbage in, garbage out is a really big deal when you're talking about someone with so much power over so many people. It's a concept we can all understand in the real world, except that when we look at king, you can look at modern politics and say it's not quite right how this person came to power, but with kings it's much more clear that it's wrong because they did literally nothing to earn it at all. Some people at least won an election, even if they lied to get there. At least they did some work, like Joffrey, someone like Joffrey or Robert.
As you look at me.
So that's just a good, I think, starting point here. Is just how big a deal it is.
And something you said that's really interesting, Aziz, is it's about labor, right? Like it's about numbers. When you're a king, they're not people anymore, right? Like you're looking at a vast amount of them, and the human brain can't really, the fantasy human brain can't comprehend all that unless he wants it to. But that's, it turns to numbers, it turns to labor. People are labor in your eyes, and how the people work towards you and pay taxes toward you. So I think your empathy probably drains out pretty quick, right? And we see also with Robert, for example, he's so ascetic, right? Like after, trying to be the best and doing the best and get the girl and win the war, he never recovers. He never bounces back from that. He just sits on his throne and waits.
That was his personality, basically, yeah. I think a lot of it will go into expectation, too. So whether you had good parents or whether you had an army behind you or funding or education, but also, did you ever expect to be here? Did you ever expect to be in charge? So, like just the Stark kids alone, where Ned was raised next to someone who's going to be the Lord of Storm's End. Kat was raised to be the heir of Riverrun. So she can tell her kids they both are very well capable of counseling other people, letting them understand, letting them know how the world works. They bring their vassal lords to table so they know everybody. I mean, this is vastly different than we were discussing earlier with Fagon. Like Holden Halfmaester gambling away family secrets while you're drinking, playing silence. No one would ever do that in Winterfell when Ned Stark was there. They're not even at war. And these people are plotting. So the expectation that you have, even while you're going to try to be king, is a lot different for these heirs. So what they do with the information for where they're headed is always important. So.
Yeah, you have this sort of byplay of versions of this where at the beginning it's really Starks and Lannisters are the main focus. You have characters who are clearly mistreated and maybe also, like Joffrey, probably have quite a lot of predisposition towards some of this behavior anyway. But from his young perspective, his father got the throne by just being the best killer in a way. Like, no, that's not literally true, but that's like from a child's perspective, you can see how that would be.
I mean, it reflects in a Game of Thrones,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah, so
that's with setting the cat spa.
exactly. So he plays out these same things, and when he like threatens Tywin or threatens, he says, "Well, your dad was, our granddad was hiding behind the rock. Like, my dad was out there fighting battles." And you're like, oh.
But I think even with Johnny, he doesn't get to see the charisma that Ned has, and the Stark kids, what they think of Robert. His kids don't think of
It's
Robert
context
that
free,
way.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like they're just like, that's that old fat dumbass. Like they don't. It doesn't seem like their father's even important to them or a part of their life. So of course, all Joffrey's going to go to is kicking someone's butt, and that's what makes a man. So that's kind of what.
Well,
Cruelty's okay.
Because look at the other kids; they just didn't. Like Joffrey's the only one that had any emphasis on his education, how he was brought up. Marcella and Tommen, they came up perfectly pure and plump, right? Like they're adorable cutie pies who have done only maybe one thing wrong ever in their lives.
Arguably some of the best people in the
The whole
whole series.
series, yeah.
They really are.
Tommen's like cats and beats. Hate beats, love cats. We love that.
Very
Tommen would be
identifying.
here at Ice and Firecon playing with feral cats. Like that's no joke. But they were left alone. So you see that they turned out all right, being mostly left alone, babied a little bit by Cersei, but mostly left alone and not effectively brought up as an heir, so to speak. And Joffrey, well, maybe they should have left him alone.
Yeah.
Which is a good maybe segue to some of the other characters. If we use maybe Bran as a jumping off, when we talk about characters who weren't raised to be heirs that are more a big part of the setup for the entire series. Let's compare Bran to, say, Daenerys. Start off with Bran. You have someone who's in his very first chapter, you see that he's part of a nuclear family. He's got support systems everywhere. His siblings, to his super loyal staff, the people from Jory and Maester Luwin, they're all really loyal to the family, partly because of the privilege of being born into a family that is respected and powerful, but emphasis on the respected for the point of this particular thought. Everyone's helping him all the time. Everyone's loyal to him, they're truthful to him. They tell him, they give him good lessons. I mean, that's the first thing that Bran gets is this lesson on fear, right? During this execution. His father comes up to him and takes him aside. And it's a very, you really get a sense that Ned's a pretty good father from that. And then you get just more and more examples of this going forward. Switch over to Dany. And you have someone who was raised by her brother. Immediately she's being sold off to a warlord when she's too young. And he's torturing her, cruel to her, telling him that he would be worse if he had to. And instead of we're this family that's always stood for protecting our people, our throne was stolen from us, and that's the only thing that matters. That's what she was raised on, right? And that's just a really important point of comparison between these two characters that often gets lost in the shuffle is their upbringing. And then the third point is you brought up Fagon. He's the truly molded version of this. He's the one that they're literally making a king, right? And so Varys gives that line oh yeah, he's been through all these things. Dany and Bran have really been through those things, going through the wild, being chased, being hunted, being in real fear, whereas his was a manufactured version of that. He had people around him that were protecting him.
He was handed a sword eventually and is going to be told, this is your father's sword.
Yes, it's the same toxic quest that Dany's on.
Even as lords, it's a kingdom in a box. That's why you got Tyreek off the side, so that he didn't have to win the loyalty and respect of his men around him. He did not have to do anything to prove that whether he's Rhaegar's son or a Blackfire. There was nothing. It's just
they're hired.
This is him, and if you follow him, you'll benefit from it personally. There's really not the same as having the infrastructure that Jon Snow or even Dany would have, where Dany has not a lot of people, but the people around her are far more loyal and willing to look out for her as compared to Aegon, who a lot of these people, they want to go home. They want a castle. They want to take advantage of him. So he's still, even at that point where, where rubber meets the road, he wasn't ready to fight. He's just not he's not a fully molded the way they think he is. He's not hardened. He might be molded, but
when the stone men come, they're get under, hide.
Yeah. Well, and that's Tyrion's test, right? Tyrion tested him. Tyrion's chapter with him where they play Savas and he realizes, oh, you're just a brat. Cool. And he's I have one of those in my family. Oh, wait, sorry. Past
Everyone
tense.
thinks
But that's a true test right there where he goes, oh, flimsy, weak. And you look at how for example, Jon, when he gets the sword from Mormont, he knows that this is something that he does not feel he has earned. He doesn't feel like he's deserved it. He doesn't feel like he should have it. But you know that Aegon, I'm sorry, Pat, I know this is your son. Aegon is, he's going to brandish probably Blackfire. Settle down. He's going to brandish Blackfire, and he's not going to feel any of the weight of brandishing what that sword has done, right? And you talk a lot of like Dany and knowing the history from Viserys and what she's heard and her struggles and how she's had to survive abuse and run and be on the run with no stability, right? And you just look at all these different children and how they're being raised, and what does that mean for their reigns? Yeah. Some of them may be short. Some of them might be no comment.
Short but effective. I think Aegon is going to do implement quite a few. Well, I think you'll have Dornish reform for sure put in, because he'll probably marry a Dornish princess, which I think is obviously better law for the land. So all those things will get put in, but good things will happen. It won't be because he's a good king, though. It's because he's used to being told what to do.
What book is this in? What book is this in that's coming out? I'm just kidding. How much of it?
Yes, I'm hoping he marries, a Martell, but
Oh, yeah, he's an Arian. Let's
for
get
sure.
real.
So, and I think we all want more
Yeah.
rights. I think the rights will come through this. It's not because he's good. It's because he was told.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
The people around him aren't there out of loyalty, except for maybe John Connington, and that's not the same system that's surrounding Bran or the rest of his siblings or a lot of these other characters, even John, like you said. And going back to John, I thought that was a great example of accepting the sword and how he treats that, but also just how he treats his interaction with Tyrion. Since we started with you mentioned the test that Tyrion gave young Griff, and he gave John a bit of a test too. It wasn't a Monarch test, but it was still a test when he called him, bastard, and saw him. He reacted to that. And John got angry, but then he thought about it. He was like, "Yeah, actually, that makes sense."
True though.
Yeah,
True.
he was like, "Actually, you got a point there." So we all respected John a little more in that moment. I think. But with Aegon, when he knocks the board over, you're like, this is literally this Sybass game is the Game of Thrones metaphor, literally right here. You saw that from from Arianne and plenty of other places, and you just did that. Yeah,
Man, this Aegon kid needs to read these books. I'm worried about this boy. I read Fire and Blood, and something about his character, and I know that obviously there is the idea maybe he could exact some great change-ish, even though he's already not in charge of his own reign. And other people are exploiting him and using his reign for what they want and their motives. Maybe he could exact change. That's what happens with most great politicians. And we're laughing. This is a fun panel.
I'm sure Varys and Illyrio would make great support systems from behind.
Well, and if you don't agree, they'll kill you. So, isn't that fun? But I feel like there's something there, like Bran, looking at how he was loved and supported, and how okay. We have our Mary Sue Starks, right? We get it. You're the good family, the happy family. You have a little bit of drama, but you're the happy family until you're not. Until that one book or so. But they get kind of like that. We're a loving family, and we have raised you and supported you, and thankfully we're rich people with a castle, but even if we weren't, we would all be okay, Brandon Stark. And you do get those vanilla vibes from that. You do get we're raised and loved. And then you look at Dany, and you see stability is really important for a family. For kids, having stability, things changing that fast and changing that often, how could you grow up happy and healthy? How could you?
How can you be expected to be above the board all the time whenever you have, traded and sold your soul just for a meal and everything else, and had to dance at somebody else's court and been made a mockery of like Dany has? So there's that expectation of you'll do anything to survive, as opposed to the expectation of you need to rule and live properly for everybody else to live. So it's not a day-by-day situation, so being armed with that. So Dany being able to shift as well as she has, but she has Barristan Selmy, might be a little weird, but he is a great politician, he's a great fighter. She has good infrastructure as opposed to
we really wonder how that's going to change. We have so many people on the way to become part of our infrastructure. And it's this really difficult kind of trying to figure out like Makoro, like
Marwyn.
Marwyn
is the one
Makoro,
I want to
like,
talk about because I just reread very slowly all the Sam chapters, right, in a row. When you meet Marwyn, so Marwyn has this great moment where he's like, Sam, please tell me all of your stories real quick, just so I can corroborate everything I saw in the glass candle is Gucci. We're good. And he's like, Sam says 2 words. He's like, great, thanks. He's like, prophecy sucks, but I'm actually going to run east real quick and go find Dany because of prophecy. Da 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 da. He's going to fail. I think Marwyn going east to Dany and trying to mentor her, I don't know how. I don't know what's going to happen, whether he even reaches her or not. I hope he does. I'd like to see some scenes, but he's going to fail. And right now, everyone is going east to Dany to basically, use prophecy or her claim for themselves. They say it's for her, but is it, though? That's a scary predicament to be in. It reminds you a lot, of course, of where Rhaenyra is, right, as when war breaks out, that she has people that all are scheming in ways that they can use power for themselves. Dany and Rhaenyra are really similar boats in that, and opposite, right, where Rhaenyra was actually raised to be heir, for the most part.
Yeah, in that regard, Rhaenyra's got more in common with Cersei. Maybe not the being raised to rule, but in the position of having a similar placement amongst the nobility already, and having a lot of power, and having to defend that against encroachment from
having 3 children of questionable parentage.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Excuse me, don't speak about Tom and one Baratheon in that way. What is that?
It might be Waters. I hate to bring it to you. It might be Tom and Waters.
Give me a book.
So, but yeah, her being able to raise her heirs, no matter who they were, whether it was with Daemon or with Larry's, I guess.
With Leaner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
I don't know. I do think there's something really different, like especially in the Valyrian dynamic. Something that I'm really appreciating on reread of Fire and Blood is it definitely seems there was a handshake deal going on. It seems that House Valyrian was like, it would be really cool to keep having heirs and have one married to a Targaryen, and the Viserys was like, it would be really cool if my daughter hadn't had bastards. And I do think there seems to be a little like, your son doesn't really want to have kids. You could just take these ones and say that, she's going to pop. It's not going good for us. I feel like it's a little different in that there was definitely an agreement. And, then you look at Cersei. Cersei didn't quite have that support. In fact, one of the footnotes in Fire and Blood that Mushroom says that was really interesting is that he's like, a lot of people thought it was Viserys, very quietly, in the alleys. They whispered it could have been Viserys that burnt down Harrenhal. When the Strongs were kind of burnt down. And I think it probably was. I think he probably was like, I gotta take care of this guy because he's really ruining my life right now.
Yeah, and also it can't keep the secret in the dark, but you don't have that support anymore if the Strongs are out of power, so.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't keep feeding the lie.
Damage control, yeah.
I think Dany would knock over the side fast board, but would Rhaenyra or Cersei knock over the side fast board?
I think both for sure.
Yeah, I think they might. I'm not sure.
I don't think Cersei would deem to play that game because
that's true.
she's
She wouldn't play in the first
busy.
place.
She would be like, I don't play games for children like that. I'm ruling a realm. What don't you people get? I don't know. I don't think she'd even play. Rhaenyra would probably only play when made to for a formal situation where Viserys is like, you need to make sure that these people are happy. Go play with their daughter or whatever. Bye.
So one thing about Dany I think that's really interesting too is that she's, among all these characters, she's still fairly young, and we haven't seen how a lot of this is going to play out. If we consider looking forward a bit, what overall, without being too specific since we can't predict too much, all these people trying to seek her out and use her for their own ends, whether it's for power or whether it's they think she's the savior of the world, like Makoro and the Red Priests, will that serve to maybe set up what was set up a lot in the Storm of Swords, where she's top of the pyramid and feeling very lonely and isolated, and this is what it must feel like to be this and that, and that seems to be going to only get worse.
I was thinking the isolation feels really, really incoming, worse and worse, especially because Marwyn, he's probably not going to last, gets over there, probably not going to last too long. I do think that maybe Makoro might last, or at least the Red Priests will play a pretty big role, but I think she's going to start being choosier about who she allows into that inner circle and kind of start to push people away more and more.
You reckon she's made mistakes? Jorah was like maybe the best example. Vet him properly first.
Is she going to be able to keep away? Because she's going to have to marry, and she'll have to keep doing that. A lot of it reminds me of Nymeria, where she's going to take this whole culture of people that they're escaping something one way or the other. They're trying to find a new land and a place to go, and she wants her kingdom back. And Nymeria had to get married 3 different times to solidify not only her people but her children. So as much as Dany, wants to be isolated and keep her pyramid structure, I mean, you still have to rule and be among the people. You cannot operate from behind the scenes, and so that's what is she going to do? And I think there's a good example with Nymeria sent the kings from Dorne to the wall in golden fetters, and Dany gave her brother a golden gift before she took over as queen. So I think it's a pretty good sign. It's fire and blood from here on out, because that's the way she's going to have to go just to survive. I mean, it's not really even wanting to be queen. This is just to live. So
it's like in CK3 when you're screwed and you're out of armies, and then you just put in the event code to get more, and you still lose, and you're freaking out. You're like, how could I lose this with all these cheat code armies I just used? Yeah, I think like the actual build up, like the upset build up, right? Like it's gonna be once you get like really alone, and the lashing out might happen because when you're alone and you're in a corner, you're not gonna be able to get anywhere better.
And she has this idea that she can't have children, so she doesn't see that sort of future for herself. And these are all, again, just keeping her youth in mind. But she's basically set up for a series of challenges that are all with enemies that aren't compromised. Like the slavers. You can't compromise with slavers. What is compromise with slavery? Some slavery? That's not a compromise.
And then she's backed into her corner, and now she has to compromise with slavery.
And then it's like the others, or Westerosi politics just not accepting her because she's
who's not
a woman with Dothraki.
Aegon.
Yeah.
And that's all I have to say about that.
But I mean, whenever you're going to get gift to the kingdom, he's going to sew up Storm's End for you. He's going to sew up King's Landing. I mean, look at all the great things he's going to do.
This is a great point, actually.
This is propaganda, actually.
Well, no, I just Storm's End.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about Storm's End, because
Stop, I swear.
the good example of how you're treated and how you turn out. Just a small example, miniature example of this. He's upset because he doesn't get to fight repeatedly. Finally, he gets into a position where he's like, you know what, I think they can't tell me what to do anymore. I'm leading the attack on Storm's End. He just wants to make up for that all at once to show how brave he is, because they've been keeping him back this whole time, and he's just chomping at the bit to prove his manliness, even though he's 16. It's a terrible idea. But
16-year-olds and terrible ideas. Wow.
Yeah.
Fertile ground.
That could be the whole series, actually. So, quote, 16-year-olds have terrible ideas.
Yeah, Bruce, hey, of all the people to make that comment, Bruce Bolton, hey, our sage on this one, he's like, boy lords are the bane of any house. Like, you know what, Bruce? You're right about that. Maybe about nothing else, but you're right about that.
There's another question I have is, when does Aegon start doing similar to Dany in that he's lashing out? Right? That because he also is feeling isolated. He suddenly is starting to understand, wow, this entire war is actually not about me, question mark? Why is everything not about me suddenly? And so, he's starting to learn the strings that are being pulled on him, that he is a puppet, and he's starting to see that and lash out and try to stop that from happening, which will probably likely not help, right?
Marry Arianne, who won't marry, something like that.
Yeah.
It won't do, the puppet won't, the piece won't move the way it's supposed to.
He could start some problems. I'd be interested to see what those problems are, but he could start some problems.
I think his problems will be not listening to the small council, and where Varys has this idea and Illyrio has this idea of how we're going to save the kingdom. Well, he's going to say no, and also my new wife has ideas, and you know what? I think we're going to redo the whole cultural system of Westeros, just by and by.
We'll make it like Pentos.
And so you're going to start almost like a civil war from where the Blackfires almost started all over again, where Daenerys was at court. Still, it's in a poisonous situation, and people are going to want their side to win. Whether it was people think there's too much Dornish influence on Daeron II. It's going to be the same thing with Aegon all over again, and that's what ended up birthing the Blackfires. So this is going to all have to come to a head, because when you're doing all of this operating behind the scenes, at some point, sunshine's the best disinfectant. So whenever you decide, I am king, I'm going to be in King's Landing, I'm going to be in the Red Keep. Well, I mean, this is where, the rubber's going to meet the road.
That's a good point.
Where ruling's going to have to matter.
And changing a ruling system like that suddenly in a drastic way before utter chaos is probably going to be happening in King's Landing. Does that then make it easier to change it again later?
Yeah, perhaps. That's a good point. Yeah, you have a sort of a pre-set up. You sort of tear the system down, try to install a new one before that one takes hold. It breaks down and yet another one takes hold, which we saw during the various anarchy periods in King's Landing during the Dance of the Dragons, when there's the Moon of Three Kings or what have you.
Yes.
I think maybe that could be another version of historical foreshadowing we've seen so much of from George, and especially because we have no real comparison to it otherwise, which is, maybe that's just how it goes, but it seems like it could fit very well with what's being set up.
And I think when you have enough foreshadowing between Game and Pale Hair's changes,
Absolutely.
What Aegon V wanted to change, when you have Dornish law and the North cultural system is obviously a lot different. So, Sansa will probably end up with a piece of the map, I would imagine. So, and if Dany's involved with it, it's tough for me to see Dornish law passing and having people involved like Dany and Sansa be like, you know what, the women should take a back seat again. You know what, let's go backwards. People don't give up rights. It just doesn't work that way. So once that door's open,
historically,
I don't think whenever it serves in their self-interest, they're not going to give up rights.
No, that's
I should just sorry,
Important. Sansa's a good example. We should maybe talk about her son because
Who?
Sansa. Yeah, no, what's interesting with her, I think, that maybe she is the most like her father in that she has gotten to see all these things and why they don't work. Notice that Ned didn't foster any of his children anywhere. Where he was fostered in the South, got embroiled in all these wars. He's like, let's not do that again. So
he
very
lost half his family last time he saw people fostered out.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound fun.
Talk about changing the system, because that's not like
it's
he's not forced to do it, but it is something that he has control over. The traditional that almost every family does, and so it's something he decided to break the mold on. And Sansa's really interesting in that regard because she goes to court. Everybody's like, oh, she's learning from Cersei. Well, no, really not from Cersei. You got to put some quotations marks. She's seeing what Cersei does and making some calls on what works and what doesn't by getting to see the results.
The difference between laughing with and laughing at.
Yeah, and not just Cersei, but other people.
She's learning from Cersei, but not from the things Cersei's saying. But
exactly.
I think it can be both. Though.
It is both.
I think it's nuanced in both because, Cersei is obviously the nega version of what Sansa almost just went through. Sansa almost had to throw her entire life away just because her dad and someone else's dad was like, well, I'm the king now, and I think that your daughter should marry into my house so that our bond can be great forever. And then she got taken as hostage and was forced to,
They do have a lot in common. Yeah,
I think that's a really big. Cersei was told she was going to marry the prince. She was told, you're going to marry the prince. You're going to have the prince's babies. And then that, bloop, we know what happened there. So I think that it's a little more nuanced than that. I think it's literally a path and avenue that could have happened to Sansa, even with the 93 pitch letter, outline letter as read.
It's a good trial run for what she went through. It's a good trial run for what she's going through again, though. She's in a different kingdom again, getting married to the heir of the kingdom, pretty much. And but what the good thing with her is I think she's learned that she needs her family, and there's so many Stark cousins in the Vale that I think she will surround herself with. We got Jocelyn Stark married in; she was a cousin who married Benedict Royce. So just from the Vale families alone, that are her cousins, are the Waynwoods, Templetons, Corbrays, and she's also in the Declarants. The Lord Declarants are also the same houses. Then you add in Horton Redford, who fostered Demeryd Bolton, so he's going to want to fight just to avenge basically him. But she's learned to cultivate all these relationships and surround her cousins with herself, so she knows to lead properly this time.
That's sort of what I meant about learning what things not to do from Cersei. She certainly learned things to do from Cersei, but the point I was trying to make is that she is good at making allies, and Cersei tends to, not be very good at that.
Push people
She
away.
tends to try to use power on them.
Untrusting.
Yeah, she's paranoid,
Right.
paranoid,
So-
which for good reason. I mean, that's part of her molding of her monarch.
Well, and with that, and thinking of like Sansa's position as that, there's actually something interesting. I want to say it's like Game of Thrones, where Catelyn and Ned are chatting about all of the different heirs, or no, her and Rob are talking about the heirs, but she's saying, "Please, not John." And she's like, "It could be a Royce, it could be this, it could be that. I could pull it all out and pull those second cousins out." And for Sansa to be where her father grew up, with dark brown hair right now, hanging out in the halls of the Vale in the Eyrie, for her to
Ron
be there.
John looked at her pretty long. He was like,
Miranda knows, let's be
Yeah,
real.
yeah, so, yeah.
Miranda's like, oh, like that one bastard in the north, Jon Snow. Looks her in the eye. Sansa, yeah, oh.
Did I
Yeah.
play that off well?
There is something that sticks out, and I think Fire and Blood has a lot of this, right? The pattern of war, and of course the men going off to war, dying, and the woman having to bring things back, right? Like Lady Sam, the Riverlands, for example, having to be resettled, which resettling the gift is probably a very similar thing that will happen and probably be heavily Sansa involved. And it also, if you mirror it with that, and you think about Good Queen Aly, right? Good Queen Alysanne was what she did when she went to the north, and she helped with rights for the women of the north, right? Stopping some Bolton fun
Along the way.
and marrying off, like working to make those matches to help kind of bring the north stronger, settling the gift, buying that patch of land of the gift and giving it to the Night's Watch. Those kind of different things, and seeing that in parallel, it puts Sansa in a great position with the Vale and with connections back to the north. Whether or not she does end up as the queen in the north, which may or may not happen, it's not my fault that it happened on a TV screen, whether or not it was true, but it's probably true. Moving on from that, glossing over that it's real. And then I say it's real.
You're right, though, to point to all the things, like this is part of what you just said there was an expansion of the things that she learned in the South, which aren't all of which from Cersei, but now she's learning, at this point, some of these things she's learning from Littlefinger, or just learning by doing them. She's been given responsibilities, and she's making the most of them. And that is very setting up her ruling the North well, or
Villain
managing it.
mentors. That's good. That's a good thought process.
Which
right
one?
There. Villain mentors, right?
Villain
Like Sansa
mentors.
being stuck with these villainous mentors and looking at some of these other people that maybe have had whether good mentors, bad mentors, etc. That's really interesting. Like looking at Arya and Sansa with their time with Sandor, for example, or looking at Arya with Jaqen, Arya with the Kindly Man and Bravos, and you have Waif.
And it started with their Catelyn and Ned. If it wasn't for that framework, that anchoring, Sansa may not be able to sort the good from the bad from these villain mentors.
and whether she knows directly
Arya
from
too.
Ned or not, she's actually spending time with the people. Like the Wayne
That
Wood
raised
heirs
him.
are, Harry, and then there's Sandor and Cynthia Frey.
Yeah.
And she's a Went, her grandma's a Went, so she's, wants a claim on the Riverlands. That's from Harrenhal, but if you need a way across the Twins, you don't have to do any bargaining with the Freys. You install your own Freys, who are your husband's fellow wards that you eat dinner with. So she'd realize from her dad, keep these people close.
Keep them at your table.
Yeah, so she's gonna not use these people, but she's gonna put them in the right, proper places because she knows that's what's best for everybody. That's what's gonna get her across the Green Fort. That's what's gonna get her control of the Riverlands, the North, and the Vale. So
Thanks, Pat.
she's
You got
learned.
it. Pat
She's
gets
learned.
it.
Why don't we talk about another character who serves a different style of example, someone whose molding comes at a much later phase when they're not a child. For example, the younger Baratheons, who neither of whom grew up expecting to be kings. Maybe they certainly expected to rule. They're lords, they're high lords, or come from a big powerful family. But it wasn't until both of them were significantly older, especially Stannis, because he's a lot older than Renly, where the idea of being king even became a thing at all to them, like the possibility. So their molding came from people like the Tyrell family around Renly and some of these other big powerful families. And for Stannis, a lot of it's just his inner circle, Melisandre, and his wife, Selyse, and not much else. Maybe a few of his lords, but it's I think Stannis is kind of an interesting. Renly's example is a little more germane. Like, yes, a lot of power-hungry people around him say you want to be king. There's plenty of interesting things there, but I think Stannis is a little more unique as
I think Stannis
for this topic.
Stannis does make a pretty good point though when he talks about Jon Arryn. Like, I should have been hand to the king in the first place. Basically, like this guy is a guy ready to hit the ground running, right? He could be an admiral. He could be your general. I mean, he's no.
It's too bad that he doesn't recognize how good Jon Arryn was as a hand while making that point. But
I would also add though, like Renly, a lot of how Renly turned out is because of Robert, because he grew up in Robert's court, and Robert wanted finery to cover up his trauma. He wanted gold, he wanted booze, he wanted girls. So Renly grew up seeing the gold and the riches all around him and all of these festivals and feasts, and he said, "That's what a king is. That right there, my beautiful big brother Robert." Because he's all he has.
And he just wasn't interested in the girls' part.
Yeah, absolutely. Good for him, that's fine. Yeah. But then, look at Stannis. Stannis actually was really raised by Crescent. I mean, Maester Crescent. Very different. And you can see a lot of that in him and a lot of the sadness. I mean, just from the prologue chapter with Crescent, you see the sadness that he has. He's like, I did not raise you to be this way, Stannis. What happened?
And that is the longest chapter in the entire series. Crescent's chapter.
Yep. And you know what happened? What happened is Robert didn't tell me I was good.
Yeah.
I think Renly's searching for the same thing. That's what he gets from Robert is
love, dude.
Yeah, say just be the center of attention, and that's what love is, because he does not know at all what even a personal relationship really is.
Renly sort of took to that, and Stannis, well, not sort of, Renly took to that.
Yeah,
He made it, and Stannis is like, this makes me uncomfortable. Is this really what I have to do? Okay. I'm not good at this.
If they have to be loyal to me, why do I have to be nice to them?
Yeah, he doesn't get it. Yeah, that nuance is lost.
Missed that lesson, you know.
Yeah, but it's another example of like what came in is what's coming out. Like he's had the most trauma of the three of them. Like he was at that age, he saw his parents die, and was not at an age, or Robert was farther along in his development and had a better support system, which is weird for the younger brother, but it's also maybe a stereotype for the middle child.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's what George was aiming for there, but it certainly is in play.
Sometimes stereotypes do exist for a reason, and Stannis is that reason.
Yeah.
Also, what about, do you think, like covering like prophecy, how it goes into molding a monarch, where somebody have Aegon the Fifth, who basically made his children stay together just because of a certain prophecy. So being raised with prophecy and like going towards it to try to achieve it. So like there'd be a lot different than.
That's a great example because it applies to Dany and Stannis, right?
Yeah.
Stannis is told by Melisandre, and Selyse buys it and is encouraging that same thing, and Dany is maybe going to get her version of Melisandre with Makoro.
Yeah.
When he shows up, assuming he does.
And fire punches.
Yeah. Yeah.
Makoro with fire punches in tow.
Yeah. And prophecy is a whole other thing, because that's one thing that we don't have very strong real world examples today, or like at all. We just like someone who's raised to be something. Well, that happens all the time. Like someone's like raised to be a child actor, or raised to be like part of some political family.
Pick a Culkin. Pick one. There's like 12.
Yeah. So it's difficult to put that one in there. It just must be something like being born into a really religious family. The closest example we can have. I mean, taught that you have to follow in the precepts of our religion.
It seemed Jaehaerys II was very much understood that prophecy was a part of this. Like, it seemed like he was ready to accept the world and like kind of rule that way. And he just was not around long enough, and it kind of like he passed quickly. And everyone's like, well, hey, that prophecy thing isn't that big of a deal. Let's go back to fighting each other for what's best, But I don't think there was never a Targaryen heir. Like, they're all fighting these dragon dreams, but none of them are actually talking about them and like, hey, did you guys,
They don't have a support system.
Did a giant dragon follow you and kill you last night in your dreams?
Bro, this keeps happening.
Maybe we should record this stuff and tell our heirs about it so they can deal with it, or
Like you think this family issue that they have, like no, we don't talk.
Yeah,
it's all about perspective.
Yeah,
it's Fight Club.
Yeah, probably should go into help molding the most important person in the world. So.
Pat, something you had kind of talked about before we've been talking about some of this is Alicent and Visenya as parallels with their children. I think you're going to parenting, and I'm really interested in hearing about that.
Well, just getting close enough to where Visenya obviously is like, I'll take care of my nephew, don't worry. Like getting it in with the family at the right spots, just like Allison did, reading stories to Jaehaerys. And then they both decided that, you know what, our kids are probably going to be better at this. So they both overthrew the half-siblings that were in front of them that they were supposed to actually help rule. Instead, they decided that we're going to make our kids and we're going to raise our family that we're actually going to take this. You know, don't worry, that's going to be ours. So though those kids were basically brought up with the expectation. I mean, Aegon II really seemed like he knew, so from a young age, like, we're going to take that. That's going to be... So, like, they were raised with that same expectation of stealing the Iron Throne by whatever way. The same way Visenya did with Maegor. So.
And to be charitable, like, who knows? It really seemed Aegon II did not care necessarily.
Yeah. Until he was convinced.
Yeah, until he was convinced. But there is, and I will say I do not care about happens to the Greens. But if I did care what happens to the Greens, if I cared about what happened to them, I do think it's actually, like, as unfair as it was to what happened to Rhaenyra, everything that went down, there are certain pressures and expectations that are on Alicent. And if you have children, I mean, what did Kristen Cole say to Aegon, supposedly, Daemon will come, and he will kill you, and he will kill your line, because Daemon...
It sounds like a credible threat. It really does.
We've seen him do a couple things before.
Yeah.
And then he does more things. So, I mean, it is a credible threat, and no dragon, nuclear, civil war is acceptable in my opinion either way. But, like, none of it's okay. But maybe we should just not. But that is part of it. Like, I mean...
But not getting that heir right was basically the beginning of the end, right?
Right.
They didn't get this question right. And that's what ended up having... Aegon II against Rhaenyra, or Aegon III, and Aegon III's kids. The oldest sons die. Then suddenly there's an uncle that wants it instead of Diana. Then you have the Blackfyre Rebellion. So all of this, not getting this question right at this pivotal moment, not raising the next heir properly, is what basically destroyed their own line by not getting that. So it's not just, that self-preservation.
I suppose that's another category here, is the people who were molded into being a monarch by being convinced they shouldn't be. They didn't. Some other people told them they should be. Like Aegon II, Daemon Blackfyre, Jon Snow maybe. There'll be other examples probably, or someone who maybe, and then they become their own advocate within their own mind, or someone maybe like an interesting kind of side example is Aegon V, who didn't force his way into the throne, but he's an example of someone who clearly was the best man for the job.
Yeah.
But it must have put the realm in a really awkward state when the heir, for a couple of years or more, we don't know the exact dates, was Aerion. And everybody's like, it must have been kind of like when Joffrey was the heir, but an adult version of Joffrey, which is far more dangerous. And the whole realm's like, And then, so if someone came to Aegon V and was like, hey, I can knock your brother off, should I do that? Or should it just be something you do on the slide, and just for the realm? One of the reasons this is important, and this is something that I know George has thought about a lot, because he's cited the series Accursed Kings many times, and that's a major theme that happens. A monarch is murdered by a family member, and the guy who becomes king is probably the better choice in the first place. He finds out later that his family was murdered, and he's like, then he has to justify it in his own mind. To be like, well, should I give up the kingship? Nah, I can't do that. I really am the best man for the job, but they murdered my nephew. But
See, I think Aaron...
Am I supposed to admit to that? Like, well, they really believe I wasn't part of it,
You know what's next. We have played CK.
Yeah, so he just has to go. He just has to roll with it,
I think Aerion would be a far more scary heir that's going to be your future, because we think he's a pretty good fighter too.
Yeah.
So he's a very capable person all the way around. So, like, I would.
Wait, what are we talking about?
Oh, Aerion. Right?
Oh, Aerion. Yeah.
Sorry,
yes, definitely.
Yeah. Adding to the other point.
I mean, he's obviously cruel and powerful. We see that in Doug Neg. So.
And he has a father like Stannis who doesn't necessarily accept the what's in front of him sometimes. He's really strong and really effective in many ways, but sometimes he's blind to what's right in front of him. Maekar and Stannis share a lot of qualities.
I do like him lying to himself about Darren. He's just passed out and drunk somewhere.
Yeah.
He's like, he could have been accosted. Like, come on.
But also like Stannis, because with blunt truth, he tends to accept it. He's like, I bet Aerion eats all the nicest steak and all that. He's like, I'm walking away, which indicates you are correct.
I've really enjoyed a lot more of Darren the Dreamer lately in books. I just rereading, and especially going back after rereading Duncan Egg and then reading other chapters where he's referenced. It's really interesting because you're like, oh, it wasn't just that he was drunk. He was drunk because he really wanted his brain to shut up.
Yeah.
And I get that, so dude, but that's it. It's crazy because then you realize, oh, so all these different headaches in your family, you're gonna start pulling those ones out. Maegor, maybe Maegor's headaches were him wanting to bash his head against the wall because he can't stop dreaming of dragons.
He's one of the ones who would be least likely to admit it, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What do you think Aegon the First? What dream did he have? What moment did he have with the Maesters where he's like, we have to put this all together, and we have to make this system and consolidate our lines? You know, like that had to have been the original dragon dream that started it. And
I think it's those 3 pages of signs importance, baby. I think that's what it is, and we're not going to know, are we, for a very long time.
Well, Marvel just left them sitting there, didn't he?
Yeah. Well, and there's something interesting, like that to me says that that's probably really the prophecy from Daenerys. Like that's probably what it is. It's probably exactly what Daenerys said that is freaking them all out and has basically made generations of Targaryens make big money moves or big fire moves, maybe. I think they're all just misinterpreting the same 3 pages of signs importance
Yeah.
for like decades and decades.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, we've seen that theme. We have people like characters like Aerys the First, especially Rhaegar is maybe the most prominent people who, and then people like Aemon who have discussed this. Like, well, we thought it was this, just this idea in the background that they've been trying to figure out, but they keep not being wrong. And then they think, oh, now we've got it, and then they're wrong again.
Someone just discussing the same 3 pages of a book over and over again, trying to analyze it and get something new out of it. Does that sound like that's us? Are we? That's us. Damn, we're Targaryens.
We haven't killed anyone yet, though.
Well, now you understand the real purpose of this convention. To lure. Speaking of prophecies.
Yeah, what do you think, guys? Do you have anything else on here? We can open it up some questions. I know we're almost at the last 10 minutes.
Actually, we have another good example maybe that's on the dark side, molding the monarch for villains. We can do a real quick comparison of Ramsay and Theon, who both had severe father issues that culminated in the exact same location, fighting over the exact same place at the exact same time.
yeah,
Right?
there's a lot going on. Like Theon Stark first met Ramsay's Bolton, like way back out on the Weeping Water. They both fought together. So like that's how they came together and became a pair. Just like this Theon Greyjoy.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's a lot of parallels that's trying to let us know about those two coming together in the first place. But yeah, how he was made, how Ramsay was made compared to how Demeric was made is quite the difference, I'd say. So
Yeah, Demeric is more like Ned or Sansa, raised
Yeah.
in the South around
he was
York.
raised by house.
Not
Well
absorbed.
loved.
Yeah.
Yeah, very well loved. Well, and it's interesting bringing Theon up in the same conversation as Ramsay, because that would mean he's a villain. Leave him alone.
Well, I mean, villainous father. Villainous deeds, yes.
Villain's fine. Well, but there is so he wanted nothing but his father's love, right? And growing up, craving his affections to just please, father, just say I'm your favorite little squiddly ear boy. And you see it when he comes back with Asha, right? You can see Asha's confidence and just the pain for Theon and how he turns him into a little bratty child. And comparing that to Ramsay, who spends a lot of his life not knowing Roose, and thinking that he is owed something.
Yeah, and he goes, so what's so interesting about Theon is how well it plays out. It's like the structure of his arc is so much Greyjoy, and then he captures Winterfell, and all of a sudden he's trying to be a Stark again. Because he's all that motivation is to please his father, to show his dad, he's like, I'm a true Ironborn. And if, as Asha said, if he had just taken the children and left, what a move! Like,
Yeah.
he would have been a hero to his people. But no, he's like, no, we rule castles. Like, no, you don't, that's not what you do. That's the part you got wrong. Like, that one thing he got wrong and then couldn't unthink.
It's that conflict of
Despite
him
the
thinking, you have the man who who passes the sentence, swings the sword in one brain, and then on the other side of the brain you have we do not so, and it's that fight between the two of how to do it right, and he's just like, burn it down.
Ramsay has less conflict about what he's supposed to do and just even less acceptance from his father.
Certainly a way to put it, Aziz.
Yeah.
Less than he's supposed to.
Yeah, because he's like, he's doing the thing that all Boltons have wanted to do for all time, destroy the Starks.
He's
You know, it's
really
like,
good at being a Bolton. It's really
yeah.
surprising.
It just sucks that being good at a Bolton is such a terrible thing for everyone else.
I do appreciate that, like, Roose is like, you know, I could worry about any of this, but I'll probably die in the next decade anyway, because I've pulled some crap lately. He's like, I'm just going to bang my wife and go. I'm good. I'm good. Good luck, Ramsay.
Not saying Ash is a bad person, but it does seem like Balon doesn't seem like a great person, but he does seem like a decent father, like at least how to be prepared as raising an heir. He seems like he knows how to mold the next one to at least protect his people and his island. You know,
You can compare Asha to Rhaenyra here, because
Yeah.
the father that really did back them
Yeah.
against all the other men, and then
Yeah.
when it actually came down to it,
Just
when
doesn't
the
matter
father
when
was
you're
gone, then
guys.
that didn't. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. You can say all day long she's the heir, but also in your society, that's not how.
Well, we got like 5 minutes. We do some questions, I guess.
Any Q's, A's?
Q's or A's. There's one.
So I wonder if the process of being an heir makes it sort of impossible to do right, you know? And I think you guys touched on that a little bit, and I'm just wondering if there could theoretically be a way to do it right, when it seems like there are so many ways that it can go
So
wrong.
the best example we had, right, is Baylor Breakspear. It's like it seemed like he was the
Hang on, let's
perfect.
repeat the question because
Oh, sorry.
the
Yeah.
recording wouldn't pick that
Sorry.
up.
Yeah.
The question is basically, what is there a right way to raise an heir? Is that even a thing? Is there maybe an ideal or something along those lines? General
Consumption
idea.
under capitalism.
I like Baylor's the most prime example of he's perfect, but we actually don't even know that because we don't even get to see him rule. So like,
Yeah.
I think that's what George has kind of smashed that idea of there is no perfect, anything, but we can definitely say as examples like Robert punching his son or different things like that. We can avoid some major glaring red marks here.
Yeah, I think one of the problems is like you raise directly or indirectly that most of us look at a system like this is wrong in the first place. Like, well, how do you prepare someone to hold power over people that they should never hold in the first place? It's kind of hard. It's really hard to wrap your head around that, right? Like, so I guess you just try to raise them to care about people as much as possible without being a pushover. Like, just to be tough, but also
be perfect in an imperfect system.
yeah,
It's
like,
not-
and
it's
that is
not
so
gonna
hard
work.
to do.
Yeah,
Like, some people just aren't cut out for that.
I mean,
You
which
can't
is
just-
why we have the children we have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Baylor is an interesting example about Baylor. I like that you brought him up because Baylor, I think, was really personal to George because Baylor is JFK. He was shot in the back of the head. He was injured in the back of the head, and George grew up in New England, where, like, in a Catholic family, where they have pictures of JFK and the Pope next to each other.
We do.
Like,
we do.
They do. See, thank you. And, so this is like to him, it's like
So who's
I
Marilyn
don't know the
Monroe?
full extent of it because this, if we're really getting into something that matters that much to George, then it's really complicated. But
Like what went into raising Baylor though was how he looks. So he was probably grown up given a little bit of a stink eye, we call it. Like is he really like all the way Targaryen? So he had a little bit of oppression. He was a little bit picked on. He was singled out. So he had some personal things to overcome. Probably made him a little bit of a better man. So him being raised in court where his dad's made fun of, his mom is like, I don't know, racism is probably the word, I guess, where they're just openly, someone would talk that way about my mom, and I'd still have to keep my mouth shut. It would be very tough for me. So, like, I think the atmosphere he was raised in would, it kind of went the long way to make him as good as he was, You have a choice. I think it also comes down to be good or bad, and he decided, well, let's help things. Let's make the system better. So
There is that sadness afterwards too. Like that's what that rich history of like understanding that he's actually somewhat a good one, as good one as you could say for them. Like that's what makes it so sad that he was willing to go out on the limb for Doug.
they were looking forward to him.
Yeah. That makes that so much sadder. 'Cause you're like,
Yeah.
man, that one he was kind of good.
He might have been
Why
the
didn't
best
we keep
one
that
yet.
one? They killed the good ones.
Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead.
So what do you guys think about Laenor as heir? Obviously from the queen who never was, who could have, should have been the heir herself, Jaehaerys, right? He then marries Rhaenyra, and yet it still doesn't work, right?
Mm-hmm. That is interesting. I do think the Valyrian dynamics are really interesting with like at that time, in the family of them. I mean, that was before you know, you have Corley's going to make his riches for the family and really make their name, but around that time, they're looking for those connections. You see a lot of ambition from the Valerians in that time, and maybe some roadblocks to getting those ambitions. And I think that, like, Lena and Laner, I would love to get, honestly, more POV. The hardest part of Fire and Blood is that it's not a POV book.
Yeah.
It's so angering, but it's
Yeah.
also, it's what makes it really clever in a lot of aspects.
Yeah.
And I know he had fun writing it, so I'm glad. And you could tell he had fun writing it, and I'm like, George, tell me the truth. But I want a POV. I want to understand, you know, where Rhaenyra's head was with a lot of this. I want the truth now, and I guess thankfully we'll get an HBO version of the truth.
Those are always good.
Yeah.
That-
Keep the bar low. You never know.
Both of Rhaenyra and Lenore both are trying to just live the lives they want,
Yeah.
and they're using the throne or
As a disguise.
yes,
yeah.
exactly, just to get what they want. So they're just completely self-fulfilling as compared. There's no way they're even trying to think of other people in that moment. You know, they're
Yeah.
trying to live their lives. They're in love with other people, and sure, like this is a business arrangement, and let's get through this.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Laenor, I think, is he's got this kind of combination of the Velaryons are more powerful in this era. It's sort of like a version of the trickle down effect. The Targaryens had like 17 to 19 dragons and were at their height of power, and the Velaryons are the next, like their cousins. So that a lot of that power trickles to them, including a dragon or two, right? Well, just one, but still the dragon. That's a huge thing.
It's a start.
And the sea snake's massive wealth. So like, yeah, they're at their high point. So you have this guy who's like, I just want to live my life.
Yeah.
And I'm not interested in women, and you know, let me just.
I think
Leave
it's
me
like the
alone.
perfect situationship for them.
Yeah.
It really was.
It could have been, yeah, it really could have been.
I
They could've
guess
just-
too, when you think about that, it's kind of almost parallel to the Marjorie, Renly, Loras circle.
Yes.
In my opinion,
Yes.
you see a lot of those similar parallels.
Absolutely, yeah. I guess that's a perfect parallel.
To modernize it, I guess. Yeah.
Yep. Nice. Well, we're probably out of 10, I guess.
Oh,
Or-
we'll take one
we'll
last
take
one. One last one, then we're done.
2 minutes.
Quick one. Right.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know there were people behind me.
It is all you.
Okay. Do you think if Robert had actually tried to like father or parent any of his children, if it would have done any good? You know, he himself lost his own parents young, and then John Aaron was like a father figure, but not really like a touchy-feely guy. So he could probably like, you know, whack him on the shoulder and be like, you did good, you won a kingdom. But it doesn't really help him like learn how to be a parent. Or were those children just doomed to succeed?
I think kids pick up so much from seeing. You know, it's just the fact that he was charismatic and other people liked him. That would have been good for Joffrey to learn. That, you know, it's important that other people like you. You don't have to beat everybody over the head with a hammer. Just buy them a drink, listen to their stories. You know, so just even being there, that's the most important thing for any kid, right? For a parent is be there, time. That's the most precious thing. It's not the money or whatever else. So he should have just actually been there.
Yeah.
Well, and to that point, that's faceted, right? He was in his trauma, you know, in his feelings, in his vibes, and he did not want anything to do with those children. And then there's the other fact that, like, Cersei probably wouldn't let him near them either, really,
Yeah.
because she wouldn't let Jaime, because obviously that would be a little too close for comfort, could pop some, you know, questions around court, but also I doubt that she let Robert that much near them, especially after he almost beat him with an inch of his life.
Yeah.
If he had any subconscious notion, too, that they weren't his, which is possible, that would also just affect the whole, his desire to bond with them in the first place.
I mean, over anything, I think we did get parenting, and that's what that was, you know?
Yeah.
That was parenting.
I think it's like a conundrum. Like, bad parents, you'd rather them not be present. Like, if they're really bad.
Right.
You know what I mean? But if they're any decent parent, the more present they are, the better. Especially really good parents. Of course, it's hard to be a really good parent without being somewhat present.
That's our time. It's 7 o'clock, guys, so